What this about 15-20 minute talk is going to be is a journey of my 6 years being a participant at the Tribeca Film Festival. So the first screenshot that you're seeing is the kind of cool waiting room area of people hanging out doing VR at Tribeca. And one can make the strong argument that film festivals have driven a lot of the storytelling work that's gone in VR, and still the natural home of these narrative and documentary pieces pretty much is film festivals, as most people don't have room scale VR, and the ones that do tend to be more interested in games than these type of narrative pieces. So this is a story about Tribeca. So this is 2015. The only VR there was myself and my colleagues, and then Chris Milk brought Clouds Over Sidra, and he was downstairs and he had lots of 3DOF devices, and we were upstairs, and we set up a 18-degree freedom tracking system, the World Viz PPT system back then, and we had a really nice kind of 10-meter square space, and we set up kind of our classic lab demos. So you can see if anyone can recognize this artist and this musician, and know you can recognize him with the goggles on, you get extra points. But this is somebody walking the plank and deciding to get on his hands and knees and walk the plank. And so in 2015, we didn't have any narrative storytelling. We just brought our lab's demos and kind of just told the story of what we do and what VR is, and how people can use it, because 2015, most people out in the world hadn't ever tried VR. So that was in 2015. And the cool thing is that when we close in 2020, we're going to revisit this notion of just using VR to tell a story about VR. In 2016, we developed something called the Stanford Ocean Acidification Experience. And this is it's about a 12-minute journey where you become a scientist, and it's a full computer graphics experience. It's room scale. There is some 360 video in it, and it tells the story of what happens to the oceans as the oceans absorb more carbon dioxide and become more acidic, meaning the pH goes down, and all coral suffers because it can't get the calcium it needs for its shells. And this took us probably a good 2 years to build, generous funding from the Gordon Betty Moore Foundation. And what I like to highlight here is that we worked with two important experts here. One was an expert in ocean acidification. Theo McKelly was a co-PI on the grant. She's the one who discovered and works in this site off the island of Ischia that shows these volcanic vents that show the future of how the oceans will look. And Theo spent dozens and dozens of hours with us, and her grad student, who's now a professor, Christy Croker, probably spent hundreds of hours with us, and she was really involved with us from the beginning. The second expertise that we had was educational technology. So another co-PI on this grant was Roy P. And Roy is an expert, and has been for 3 or 4 decades, of building technology to better communicate science, whether it's early web stuff or applications that people use that involve video. Roy just knows how to tell stories for learning. And we worked with Roy and Theo, again, from the design phase, from the storyboard phase, all throughout the process. And I think that's a really important lesson for people to take home, which is working with experts, really, really important. I would never venture to build any VR demo without working with a domain expert, and that really pays off. So the Stanford Ocean Acidification, like everything I'm going to talk about today, is free. You can download it off the web. What have we done with this piece? So this piece is probably one of the most studied things in VR. We put it in schools, we put it in colleges, we put it in informal learning context, and we've shown now that people learn. You can learn quite well from this. There's good learning transfer. You can look later on, and we know people learn. But more importantly, because it's probably obvious to a lot of people that VR, you can learn from it, is motivation to learn. we were, going back to this piece. So I'm showing you the upstairs room at the Tribeca Film Festival on Varick Street, where they host the VR room. There was a line of, we ran this probably for 3 or 4 days in a row. There was a line of 200 or 300 adults for 9 hours a day nonstop. And it just, we didn't get to serve everybody in this year because we hadn't really figured out throughput. But, for the ocean acidification experience, we also had a line nonstop of adults. In this instance now, is we ran for 8 days straight for about 9 hours a day. And in this instance, we had, hundreds and hundreds, thousands of people over the week and waiting in line for an hour. And you don't see that for a chemistry textbook, right? And there is a lot of basic chemistry taught in the ocean acidification experience, and you're moving molecules around in your hands and you're doing biology. And it's just it's a great way to do the work, and the motivation to learn it is a really important piece. Scaling, we have now shown by analyzing data from Steam as well as Oculus Share that over half the planet, over 100 countries have downloaded and installed this ocean acidification experience. It's been just used a ton by different organizations all over the place. It's really neat. A lot of us in our work, academics, you publish a paper, maybe you do a YouTube video about a talk, but this kind of scale, it's really hard to achieve. And there's still not a lot of great VR content out there yet. And so if you do build something great, you can achieve scale because people are always looking for good content. Policy. So we did a briefing at the US Senate, and we brought in a number of senators and congresswomen and congressmen, and more importantly, their staffers over a couple-day period. And, it's a way to give policymakers an experience that they wouldn't have otherwise. And, we did have a couple appointments with climate change deniers. I'm happy to talk about that in the Q&A, and putting them through the climate change VR didn't change any of their minds, but it certainly led to good conversation, and it led to at least common ground to have a conversation. And so, again, I'm happy to talk about that. Mostly what we did is we taught senators who were fully behind the cause of climate change. We taught them about VR because they hadn't really been in VR before. So, but we tried to do both. Okay, so we are now in the year 2017, and I'm going to talk about a piece called Becoming Homeless. Becoming Homeless is about a 6-minute piece, and Becoming Homeless is based on the work of a Stanford psychologist, Lee Ross. He talks about something called the fundamental attribution error. And what the fundamental attribution error is that when something bad happens to us, to me, I blame the situation. Situational stuff caused me to do something bad. It wasn't me, it was the situation. When I see someone else doing the same thing, I blame their character. All of us do this all the time. When bad things happen to us, we blame the situation. For other people, we give more internal attributions. And this is just kind of how the world works. It's been a heuristic that's received attention for many decades now, and by Lee Ross. What we wanted to do was build something to try to help reverse this in the domain of being homeless. We wanted to have an experience, a visceral experience, where people could experience what it's like to become homeless from situational factors. And in other words, we didn't want them, we wanted them to see that many homeless people are not there because of mental illness or internal characteristics. Sometimes it's situational. And I'll show you a video of this. And so you're in your apartment, you lose your job, you're trying to sell stuff in order to make rent. You don't, you get kicked out and evicted. You're living in your car now. You got your backpack, but you get pulled over because it's illegal to live in your car in parts of California. You're trying to sleep on a bus. You can't do so because that guy's harassing you. This other guy's stealing your stuff. Then you meet actual homeless people, and they tell you their stories. And we, of course, interviewed actual homeless people and brought their stories with you. So it's a piece that is designed to show you how one becomes homeless and get you better connected from it. This is also free online, like everything I'm going to talk about today. If you go to the content tab of my webpage or just go find it on Steam, it's been used by many organizations, whether it's governments or nonprofits, to educate and to illustrate their cause. One of the, Doug mentioned VR empathy in the intro. One of the most, the most important papers on VR and empathy is by Fernanda Herrera. She's run a large-scale study. So I believe in this study I'm talking about now, she had about 600 subjects come through becoming homeless, and more importantly, she looked at them 2 months later. And so one of the big questions about all these VR empathy pieces is, sure, you can run a study in the lab and have somebody fill out a questionnaire saying they care about the cause more, but does it change behavior 2 months later? And in all of our work, when we study this, we look at behavioral measures. And what Fernanda looked at in this study, after you pull the goggles off, she'd hand you a clipboard, and the clipboard had a questionnaire, and sorry, it had a petition. The petition was at one point in time, it was an actual proposition on the ballot in California. Of course, that only worked in that one election year, but we based a petition where you had to sign it, and your signature actually was going to go towards either this proposition in the 1 year, or 2 decision makers. And what Fernanda demonstrates, even when you look 2 months later, you get changes in behavior from doing this in VR compared to watching a video or other types of role playing that people tend to do. So nice data point there. Also, it's a good time here to point out, when you're talking about these VR empathy demos, it's not a magic bullet. It doesn't solve prejudice, doesn't change people's lives instantly. It's a media experience. Media experiences can be very impactful, but we have to remember, I often get this question, Jeremy, does VR cause empathy? And I say, this is a ridiculous question. You would never ask this about the medium of video or about the medium of radio. It depends what you do with it. And I think that's a really important take-home lesson. So that's Becoming Homeless. On to Thousand Cut Journey. We're now in the year 2018. This is a very intense piece where you become a Black male named Michael Sterling, and you experience bias and overt racism throughout the courses of your life. So this was done in collaboration with Courtney Cogburn. Courtney is a Columbia professor whose amazing work studies race and health. And so she was the domain expert here, and we worked together on this project for years. And I would say we probably spent about 6 months, maybe 7 months on the storyboard alone. In other words, we're having a piece that's about what it's like to experience discrimination as a Black person. And there was intense negotiation in a good way, just intense and wonderful deliberations about a horrible, horrible thing. But the process here, I would say we spent more time on the storyboard than we did on the coding. And in this experience, you become Michael Sterling. And the top left panel there, you see that you're a kindergartner, and you're playing with kids. The kids ostracize you. They don't look at you. When they do, they say some things that are unkind. Everyone's playing with blocks and throwing blocks around. The second you touch a block, we've got some logic here. The second you touch a block and pick it up with physics, once you drop that block or throw it, the teacher is cued to stand up and start yelling at you, which is again, all this based on Courtney's research about differential treatment of people with different skin colors from different authority figures. And so the teacher yells at you for doing something that the other kids are doing too. In the second scene, you can see me on my knees there. This is our stop and frisk scene that when we first designed this, we started the work on this in 2016. It didn't premiere Tribeca until 2018, but obviously the notion of policing and race is much more salient now than it was then. And we actually felt back then that we were just on the borderline of taking it a little bit too far of how intense the experience is. So in this scene, you're about to cross the street, you're with your friend, you're on your way to a basketball game. Because you have a sweatshirt that is similar to a shirt of somebody the police are looking for, the officers come and force you to get down on your knees. When we have logic, the scene doesn't move until you go down on your knees. And then you have to put your hands up. We have logic that basically cue what the officers say, and they basically cajole you until you're on your knees with your hands up. And this is a super intense scene. Again, it seems a bit tame now given what's been going on. But you're a teenager there, and you of course, your friend, nothing happens to him. And then the second that the police find out that you're not the guy, your friend says, "Oh man, come on, let's go to our game," and just really minimizes your experience. In the third scene there, you can see that it's a bit on the bottom left now. It's a bit of you're in an office space and you're in an interview. And in this scene, what happens is that the man who's interviewing you doesn't know that you're even in the room, doesn't give you any attention at all. Comes out, the receptionist says, the candidate from Yale is now ready for his interview, and the man walks immediately over to the white person, ignoring you while you're sitting there, and then so you get ignored. You don't. He mistakes the other person for you. You go through the interview, and at the end, on the bottom right scene, you're there with your girlfriend, receiving the news that you didn't get the job because you weren't the right fit culturally. Again, which is based on a lot of Courtney's research. The one thing I will point out here is that you see in that bottom right panel, there's a mirror when you're doing what's called body transfer, which is you really want that avatar when we're changing somebody's race or their gender or their species. Even we've done some work where people become a cow and a piece of coral. You need to show them that they have a different body, and that mirror there is done exactly for that. So we've got lots of research on this. And showing its efficacy. Courtney has run this amazing study where all the incoming graduate students to Columbia do this as part of a race class. And so we've got this amazing data where we follow the cohort over a 2-year period, and we are not all, some of them do VR, some of them don't, and looking at how it changes their beliefs about systematic racism, et cetera. I'm happy to talk more about this. In terms of how this is being used, we had a very long conversation about this, and deservedly so, about what to do with this. So we didn't want to just put it up for free online because 2 reasons. A, if you're a person of color, this is a triggering experience, especially that scene with the policing and the teacher. It's really terrible to go through. So we worry about that. 2, whenever we demo this, whether it's at a film festival or we've done a lot of work now installing this in corporations, working with their HR departments to help them build a curriculum around this as they teach about issues of race and bias. It's really important to onboard and to offboard somebody properly for this, because it's a really intense piece, and you don't want someone just going through it and not knowing why this is happening and how to think about it when they're done. On the other hand, we really want people to have this, especially in the last year and a half. The amount of inbound emails we get about this is probably 4 or 5 a day of people wanting to use it for good causes. And so we ended up deciding to put it online for free, but with a filter. So in order to download it, you have to talk about how you're going to use it. You have to receive some materials that we're using for onboarding and offboarding, and that's kind of how we settled on it. So for anyone that wants this, please just go online and fill out that form. Coral Compass, this is the first 360 video I'm showing you. We had another one along the way, also about acidification, called the Crystal Reef, but I want to talk about Coral Compass. So here is an instance where Stanford has an amazing class. It's called Stanford at Sea. You basically go on a boat for a month and you do awesome marine science. And so we flew to Palau, which is an island nation in Micronesia. Palau is famed for having incredibly mind-blowingly amazing reefs, but also having real issues with climate change, with coral bleaching, with ocean acidification, with rising temperatures, and eventually with sea level rise threatening their existence as an island nation. So we went to Palau, and I only got to spend 3 days there, unfortunately, because it is utter paradise there. But Elise and Tobin, who are co-directors on this piece, they spent 2 weeks there, and they went underwater every day. They didn't do any scuba diving, but they did a ridiculous amount of free diving. And you can see Tobin there diving down with an underwater 360 camera. And what we did is we just filmed a ton of places that were relevant to climate change. And so this piece, unlike ocean acidification experience, which is really teaching people about climate change and showing them the kind of the future horrors and telling them what to do about it, Palau can't do anything about climate change. They're a small nation. There's 20,000 citizens. They get about 100,000 tourists a year who come mostly to do scuba diving. If they reduce CO2, they're not going to affect global warming, and they're not really going to be a part of that conversation. So their only choice is to adapt. And so this film is about how adaptation to climate change helps. And there's three important scenes. One, this is again free to download. You can even watch on YouTube 360. We went to the most gorgeous spot called Soft Coral Arch. It's a coral reef that's in the shade because of this limestone arch. It's very rare to have that, and because of that, you have this beautiful, soft, flowing coral it looks more like flowers than coral. It's unbelievable. And we got there early in the morning at about 6:30, and that's important because it's a popular destination, and we got there when it was pristine. And so we filmed the arch for a few minutes, just being gorgeous. And then the first boat of tourists arrived, and I'd never seen anything like this. Most of these tourists, they couldn't swim, so they were in life jackets clinging to these rafts all around them in a semicircle. And as they floated into this reef, their fins were just kicking the side of this arch and just destroying, you just watch it get dislodged. And that happened, about 30 times every single day. And so that was one of the scenes. I'll focus on that one for now, because I know, Doug, I said I'd be brief and leave time for questions, but professors, we're not very good at being brief. We filmed a number of scenes, but it was really about adaptation. So how can you change tourism rules? How can you change things like cutting down the mangrove trees? The mangrove trees trap sediment. The sediment then causes the water to get, the light doesn't go through it in the same way, and then the coral dies. So it's about how can Palau adapt to climate change so that the reefs will be more resilient as these other things come through. And we had the pleasure of being able during our stay to present to the government. Again, it's a small nation of 20,000 citizens. They've got senators and they've got House delegates, and we had all of them in a room and we put them through VR. And I can tell you two neat things happened. One is, that's a senator right there. The culture of Palau, if you're a citizen, you don't go in the ocean. They're very afraid of sharks, and they like to fish and they like to wade in the beaches, but diving is not something that they've done. And so I will tell you that the utter joy that these lawmakers got from being able to be inside of the reefs that, again, really fuel their economy. They're just watching the joy and the surprise and the awe was quite cool. The second thing that happened is later on that day they signed an agreement to work with climate change scientists more to as they build their policies. But the truth is they were going to do that no matter what happened that day. What happened a few months later was them changing their tourism policy in order to better protect the reefs. And a lot of that was just based on, I didn't describe the scene. So in the scene, we have the lawmakers, they look down and they're in Soft Coral Arch, and they look up and they see all the beautiful coral. We then have them look down again, and we track their head to make sure they're actually looking down. And then we swap the videos from the pristine to the utter chaos of the people floating above them and destroying the reef. And they're then told to look up, and just the intensity of that reaction of anyone, but more importantly, when your economy depends on that reef existing. I mean, this spot called Soft Coral Arch is literally, without exaggerating, many people fly to Palau simply to see that. That's one of the reasons why they choose that destination. And they changed the way that tourists were trained and the rules around tourism a few months later. And while we can't be sure that VR was the only cause, a number of people from Palau have indicated that it was one of the reasons why they pursued that. So we failed in the US to make a dent in climate change, but doesn't mean that you can't really succeed with better connecting lawmakers to their content. And then I will close in 2020. What I like to say is the last narrative piece I'm ever going to build, because one thing we can talk about is, why am I building narrative pieces? I'm a trained cognitive psychologist, an experimentalist in VR. and what qualifies me to tell stories? And the answer is, you know, there's a lot better storytellers out there, and now there are amazing studios you can work with, and people who just do this in a way that is better than I can. But what the piece I'm proud of all these pieces, and when I say me, I threw this slideshow together quickly this morning because I decided I wanted to talk about storytelling in a way that that gave us some material to talk about. I would have listed all the co-directors and all the people involved, and if you download the pieces, you'll see that all of these take an incredibly large effort from lots of people. This piece, it really goes back to 2015, where what I brought to Tribeca was a series of lab demos. So any of you that have VR Lab, and Doug, I know you've done this a bunch of times, you have VIPs come from the university, or you have family members come, or you have a third grade class come, and you put the goggles on them, and then they get to walk the plank, and they get to do a couple other demos, and you basically educate them about VR, and you do what's called the lab tour. My lab tour at Stanford, we began a policy in 2010. Every Friday at 4 p.m., no matter who you were, if you showed up at our lab window that day, we would give you an hour-long tour run by the lab manager or me or by one of the grad students. And we did that every Friday for 8 years straight. It was an awesome experience. I mean, we ended up stopping it just because it's exhausting, and we had a couple strange experience with strange people that just showed up to the lab that were a little bit off-putting, but nothing bad ever happened. But that being said, we still, you know, forgetting COVID for a second, give 3 or 4 tours a week, whether it's to a third grade class or to a group of donors or CEOs from the Valley, or anyone who's coming to visit. We give lots and lots of lab tours. To our calculation, we've given lab tours to at least conservatively 20,000 people have come through my lab and heard my, you know, taking them through all the demos, and all the demos in our lab tour about our science. So you learn about presence by walking the plank. You fly like Superman or Superwoman in order to learn about our study, where we show modeling of altruism. You go to the mirror and you become a different race and experience discrimination. You play Stanford football and you learn decision making while on the football field. And the way that the lab tour works is that you put on the goggles, you do the demo, you take the goggles off, and I explain to everybody what, you know, why that's important for science. What virtual becomes reality is it's a 14-minute piece, and the lab tour was an hour, so I believe 14 minutes is a bit long for a narrative piece, but it's much better than an hour, which the lab tour was, and it's all self-contained, and the logic works perfectly, not perfectly, but it works well enough to get done in the sense that once you put the goggles on, no one needs to say a word to you. So you're greeted by a volumetric capture of me, and the kind of that gives you the intro into what you're going to be doing, and then you actually walk a little bit of a plank and learn about presence. You fly like Superman. You cut down a tree to learn about paper conservation. You meet Grover and you tickle him and you dance with him, and he's very responsive to you. And you learn about our research with VR and kids. We've got again the race mirror. We have you grow a third arm at one point, and we talk about controls and how VR can do things that are superhuman with controlling a third arm. And it's a really neat experience where you learn all about our lab's research in a one demo at a time. And it's been the hardest thing we've ever, not that the others haven't been hard, but this one has been next level intricate in terms of all the fail safes and the logics in order to make it work, and so many different models and different scenes. So that is where I'll close with the formal presentation. But anyone, and Wallace has already done this a few times, I appreciate that, but anyone that wants to try this, we're going to release it on Steam. We've got a non-negotiable deadline by 8 weeks from now to put it up on Steam for free, because we're losing our programmer. He's going to be moving on from Stanford, our main programmer. There's a team of probably 30 people that have been working on this. But anyway, if anyone wants to give feedback, I'm happy to send you a build, and you can give us feedback on it. And we encourage all of you to try to break it, because once you put stuff on Steam, the hate mail that I got from becoming homeless, not becoming, actually, the biggest hate mail was from the ocean acidification experience, because none of these pictures really show it. It's room scale, and it's really designed. At one point, you're doing a snail hunt, and if you don't have a 4-meter square at least, then you can't do it. And of course, we've changed that now, and so it works in a smaller space. But the yeah, this is good advice. If you solve that issue before putting it on Steam, your ratings are going to be much higher, because you're not going to get people who are really furious because they didn't get to finish the demo and give you 1 star, and then make and say horrible things with bad words that I won't repeat. But at any rate, that's where I'll close. Send me an email. We'll give you a build if virtual becomes reality, and I'm excited to hear your questions and feedback.